My family thought I was too sick to notice my $900,000 disappearing until I checked my accounts myself. That number, $900,000, it wasn't just a figure on a statement, it was the bedrock of my future. Or at least it was supposed to be. It was the inheritance from my grandmother, a woman who'd believed in me fiercely, even when my own parents seemed to reserve their praise for my brother, Mark. She'd left it to me, explicitly, in her will, a sum meant to secure my independence, to ensure I'd never have to rely on anyone else's goodwill. And for a while, it felt like that. The money was in a trust, managed by the family's longtime financial advisor, Mr. Abernathy. He was a staid, gray-haired man who always smelled faintly of expensive cigars and older paper. My parents had always used him, so when Grandma passed, it was a no-brainer. They handled the initial setup, telling me it was for the best, to keep it safe from my debilitating illness. The illness. That was the golden ticket, the easy excuse. It had started a few years back, a gradual decline that baffled doctors. I wasn't dying, not by a long shot, but I was often in pain, fatigued, prone to debilitating migraines that could sideline me for days, sometimes weeks. It made holding down a steady job difficult, made me dependent. And my family, particularly my mother, leaned into that dependence with a fervor that was both suffocating and, in a twisted way, comforting. They provided for me, they said. They managed my affairs. They were taking care of me. My father, a man of few words and even fewer displays of affection, would nod gravely when my mother explained how much effort it took. Mark, bless his oblivious heart, would offer platitudes and a brief, awkward hug before retreating back into his successful corporate life, his own considerable fortune untouched by any such affliction. He was the golden child, the one with the perfect wife, the 2 kids in private school, the corner office. I was the delicate one, the burden, the one who needed constant supervision. After Grandma died, the trust was established. Abernathy sent me quarterly statements, neatly printed on thick cream paper. I'd glance at them, see the impressive balance, and feel a surge of relief. It was there. It was safe. My parents had assured me they were handling all the complexities of estate management, that I shouldn't worry my pretty little head about it. And I hadn't. Why would I? I was sick, for God's sake. My brain felt foggy half the time. The thought of navigating financial paperwork seemed like a Herculean task, one I was only too happy to delegate. The first hint, the tiniest ripple in the placid surface of my family's supposed concern, came subtly. It was during a particularly bad spell, a week where the migraines had been relentless, leaving me pale and weak. My mother was fussing, bringing me lukewarm soup and checking my temperature with an overly concerned frown. She mentioned casually, as if it were a minor logistical detail, that the house needed some urgent repairs. A leak in the roof, a faulty furnace, things that, she sighed, were just so expensive these days. Then she added, her voice dropping a notch, "You know, if we needed to dip into your inheritance a little bit, just temporarily, to cover these things, I'm sure Abernathy would understand. It's your money after all, and we're all family." My stomach clenched. Dip into it? Temporarily? The thought sent a cold dread through me.
"No, Mom," I'd managed to say, my voice weak but firm. "Grandma left that for me, for my future, not for house repairs." She'd waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, darling, don't be so dramatic. It's just a few $1,000s. You'll have plenty left. Besides, it's for our house, where you live." That was the first time the idea of them taking my money, of them seeing it as a communal pot rather than my personal safeguard, had taken root. I'd pushed it away. They wouldn't. They loved me. They were taking care of me. The sickness clouded my judgment. That was all. The next few months were a blur of doctor's appointments and physical therapy sessions. The migraines seemed to ease slightly, replaced by a persistent fatigue and a dull ache in my joints. I was feeling a little stronger, though, enough to start reading more, to engage with the world beyond the 4 walls of my room. I started noticing things, little things at first. My mother's new designer handbag, the casual mention of a weekend trip to Napa with friends, a new car Mark had bought for his wife. These weren't extravagant purchases, but they were noticeable, and they remembered my mother's words about the house repairs. Then a more concrete incident. It was my birthday, a quiet affair at home. My parents, Mark, and his wife Sarah were there. Sarah, who always seemed to be evaluating me with a subtle, almost imperceptible judgment, brought a gift. It was a beautiful cashmere sweater, soft and luxurious. "It's from Saks," she'd said, a little too brightly. "On sale, thankfully. Everything's just so expensive. A familiar refrain. Later that evening, my mother casually handed me a check. "Happy birthday, dear," she'd said, her smile a little strained. "Just a little something from us, for your special day." The amount was $500. It was a pittance compared to the vast sum I knew was in the trust. But it was the implication, the timing. It felt like a deliberate, almost haunting reminder of my financial dependence, a stark contrast to the implied wealth of the sweater. It wasn't about the amount. It was about the message. They were the providers. I was the recipient. The unease grew, a persistent hum beneath the surface of my life. I started paying closer attention to the financial statements Abernathy sent. They were always the same: a substantial balance, the accrual of a small amount of interest, a few minor debits for trust and administration fees. Nothing that screamed problem, but I began to feel a prickle of suspicion, a nagging voice that whispered, "Is it really still there? All of it?" It was during a particularly clear-headed week, a period where the fog of my illness seemed to lift, that I decided to take a proactive step. I called Abernathy's office. I wanted to speak to him directly, to get a sense of how things were being managed. I framed it as wanting to understand my grandmother's legacy better, to feel more connected to her wishes. His secretary, a brisk woman named Brenda, informed me that Mr. Abernathy was extremely busy, but she could schedule a brief call. When Abernathy finally got on the line, his voice was professional, polite, but distant. He spoke in generalities about the trust performance, assuring me everything was in excellent order. He mentioned that some minor adjustments had been made in the portfolio to reflect market trends, but that the principal remained largely untouched. Largely untouched. That phrase stuck with me.
My illness, though still a significant factor in my life, was becoming more manageable. I'd found a new doctor who was trying a different treatment approach, one that seemed to be reducing the frequency and intensity of my migraines. I was gaining back some energy, some clarity, and with that clarity came a growing resolve. I wasn't going to be a passive participant in my own financial life any longer. I requested a full, detailed statement of all transactions, not just the summary pages. Brenda eventually sent it over, a thick stack of paper that arrived by courier. I spread it out on my dining room table, my hands trembling slightly, not from illness, but from a building sense of anticipation. The first few pages were as expected: quarterly statements, interest payments. Then I started seeing them: withdrawals. Small at first, then progressively larger. They were all attributed to family support expenses or household management. There were dates, amounts, and then a signature line. Every single withdrawal was signed by my mother. My blood ran cold. My mother, signing away my money. For what? Family support expenses? My parents were comfortably well off. They owned their home outright. Mark was successful. What family support was she providing that required systematically depleting my inheritance? I went back through the statements, cross-referencing the dates with specific events. There was a large withdrawal right after my brother's youngest son started kindergarten, with a hefty tuition bill attached. Another one coincided with a lavish anniversary trip my parents took to Hawaii. And there were smaller, recurring amounts, scattered throughout the year, that seemed to correspond with my mother's frequent shopping sprees and the upkeep of her beloved garden, which always seemed to be overflowing with expensive imported plants. The numbers were staggering. Over the course of 2 years, nearly $200,000 had been systematically drained from the trust. $200,000. That was a quarter of my inheritance, and it wasn't temporarily dipping. It was a steady, calculated hemorrhage. I felt a wave of nausea. This wasn't care. This wasn't support. This was theft. Not illegal, perhaps, not in the eyes of the law if she had the authority to sign, but a betrayal of the deepest kind. Grandma's legacy, my grandmother's love, being siphoned off for patio furniture and private school fees for the grandchildren she already doted on. My mind raced. How had Abernathy allowed this? He was supposed to be a fiduciary, bound by duty to protect my assets. Had he simply rubber-stamped my mother's requests? Had they colluded? The thought of Abernathy, the staid, proper Mr. Abernathy, being complicit in this deception made my head spin. I looked at the remaining balance on the statements. It was still substantial, but significantly less than it should have been. The future Grandma had intended for me, the freedom and security, felt suddenly fragile, diminished,
The migraines returned with a vengeance that night, a physical manifestation of the emotional turmoil churning inside me. But this time, the pain was different. It wasn't just the throbbing in my head. It was a searing anger, a cold, hard resolve crystallizing in my gut. They thought I was too sick to notice, too weak to fight. They had underestimated me. They had underestimated the woman my grandmother had believed in. The next morning, I sat at my desk, the statements spread out before me.
The initial shock had subsided, replaced by a chilling clarity. I wasn't just a victim of illness anymore. I was a victim of deception, of betrayal by the very people who claimed to love me most. And I wasn't going to let it stand. The game had changed, and I was ready to play. I picked up my phone, my fingers steady now, and dialed Abernathy's office once more. This time, there would be no polite inquiries. This time, I was coming for answers, and for my money. My family thought my illness was a convenient leash, a way to control me, to keep me dependent and malleable. They were wrong. It was a cage, yes, but even the most secure cage can be escaped if the prisoner learns the locks. The detailed transaction statements from Abernathy's office weren't just proof of their systematic drain on my inheritance. They were the blueprints to that lock. The sheer audacity of it, my mother signing off on withdrawal after withdrawal for trivial luxuries, for things that had nothing to do with my actual needs, was breathtaking. It was a betrayal so profound, so personal, that the initial shock gave way to a cold, simmering fury. The emotional hangover of betrayal was intense, a nauseating cocktail of hurt and rage, but beneath it, something new was forming, a hard, unyielding resolve. They thought I was a liability, a delicate flower wilting under the slightest strain. They were about to discover I was more like a weed, tenacious and capable of pushing through concrete. I started digging deeper, not just into the statements, but into the nuances of the trust agreement itself. I requested a copy of the original trust document, the one Abernathy had helped my parents set up after Grandma's passing. Brenda, Abernathy's secretary, seemed increasingly flustered with each of my requests. She'd always defer, always promised to look into it, but the response was always delayed or incomplete. It was clear they were trying to stall, to hope I'd get tired or that my illness would flare up and distract me. Little did they know, my illness was becoming my superpower. The pain that once crippled me was now a sharp focus, a constant reminder of what I was fighting for. The fatigue that had once made me apathetic was now a fuel, driving me to seek solutions with a desperate urgency. When the trust document finally arrived, it was thick, legalistic, and daunting. I spent hours poring over it, often with a heating pad strapped to my temples, the pain a familiar, almost comforting companion. The language was dense, full of legalese designed to protect the trustees and the beneficiaries. But there was a clause, buried deep within the labyrinthine text, that made my heart pound with a sudden, electrifying hope. It stated that while the primary trustee, in this case my father, had broad discretion over the trust's management and distribution, any major financial decisions, particularly those involving significant principal withdrawals, required the written consent of the primary beneficiary or a court order. My father was listed as the primary trustee. He was the one who supposedly held the reins, the one who was supposed to be the ultimate arbiter. But the clause was specific: primary beneficiary consent or a court order. And my mother, with her signature on those withdrawal slips, had acted as if she held sole authority. Had my father even been aware? Or had my mother, in her usual assertive way, simply taken charge, assuming he wouldn't question her, or that he'd go along with her narrative? The more I thought about it, the more likely the latter seemed. My father was a man of quiet complicity, more content to let my mother steer the ship, as long as it didn't rock his comfortable existence. I looked back at the statements again, at my mother's signature. It was always there, a flourish of cursive across the bottom of each withdrawal form. But where was my father's? Where was his approval as the primary trustee? There was none. Abernathy's office had simply processed these withdrawals based on my mother's signature alone. This, I realized with a jolt, was a serious breach of fiduciary duty. Abernathy hadn't just facilitated my mother's spending spree, He'd done so by overlooking a fundamental procedural requirement of the trust itself. He had bypassed the designated trustee and acted solely on the signature of a joint beneficiary, who, by the trust's own terms, did not have that unilateral authority. The implication was enormous. Abernathy, and by extension my parents, had operated outside the legal framework of the trust. My mother's actions were not merely irresponsible, they were potentially illegal, and Abernathy's compliance made him equally liable. This wasn't just about getting my money back anymore, it was about accountability. I needed to know for sure about Abernathy's role. I decided a direct confrontation was necessary. Not a shouting match, not an emotional plea, but a calm, collected demand for facts. I scheduled an appointment with Abernathy, explicitly stating it was regarding the management of my grandmother's trust. This time, Brenda couldn't stall. I was firm, and my voice, though sometimes wavering with a phantom ache, held a new steeliness. The meeting took place in Abernathy's office, a room steeped in the same hushed professionalism as before. The smell of cigars lingered, a comforting reminder of my grandmother. Abernathy sat behind his polished mahogany desk, his expression polite but guarded. He looked older than I remembered, his gray hair a little thinner, his eyes holding a weariness that spoke of long hours and difficult clients. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Abernathy," I began, my voice steady. "I've been reviewing my trust statements, and I have some questions about several significant withdrawals that have occurred over the past 2 years, specifically those authorized solely by my mother." Abernathy shifted in his seat. "Yes, Miss Hayes. As I mentioned on the phone, market fluctuations can sometimes necessitate adjustments, but the principle remains sound." "With all due respect, Mr. Abernathy, these weren't market adjustments," I said, my gaze unwavering. "These were substantial sums, withdrawn repeatedly and authorized only by my mother. The trust document, which I have here," I tapped the thick folder on my lap, "states that significant principal withdrawals require the consent of the primary beneficiary or a court order. My father is the primary trustee, and I have no record of his direct authorization for these specific transactions, nor of any court order." Abernathy's composure flickered. He steepled his fingers, his gaze dropping to the desk for a fraction of a second. "Your mother has always been very involved in managing household expenses and family matters, Miss Hayes. She has a good understanding of your needs." "My needs, Mr. Abernathy are not met by a new set of patio cushions or a trip to the Caribbean," I stated, the words sharper than I intended. "Those withdrawals, as itemized in the statements you provided, were for things like household maintenance, which included landscape renovations, and family support, which coincided with my brother's children's private school tuition payments. Those are not expenses that deplete my inheritance without my direct informed consent. And more importantly, they were not authorized according to the trust's own bylaws." He cleared his throat. "There's a level of flexibility granted to trustees in interpreting family support and household management for the beneficiary's comfort and well-being." "Comfort and well-being," I repeated, a dry laugh escaping me. "So my mother's personal shopping sprees and my brother's educational expenses fall under my comfort and well-being as interpreted by her signature alone. And you, as the financial advisor entrusted with my grandmother's legacy, simply went along with it? Did you even consult with my father, the primary trustee, on these specific transactions?" Abernathy hesitated. "Your mother presented these as necessary expenditures. Given her close involvement and your health situation, it seemed prudent to facilitate her requests. Your father, he trusts her judgment implicitly." There it was, the tacit admission. He hadn't consulted my father. He had abdicated his professional responsibility, relying on my mother's word and the assumption that my illness made me incapable of questioning the process. He had become an accessory to my mother's financial overreach, and in doing so, had violated his fiduciary duty to me, the beneficiary. "Prudent," I echoed, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Mr. Abernathy, what you facilitated was not prudent. It was a deliberate circumvention of the trust agreement. You were aware of the trust's terms. You helped draft them. And yet you allowed my mother to systematically siphon funds that were meant to secure my future without the proper authorization from the trustee and without my knowledge or consent. You essentially enabled the misappropriation of my inheritance." His face had gone pale. The veneer of professional detachment was cracking, revealing a man clearly in over his head, caught in a web of his own making. Miss Hayes, I assure you, my intentions were always to act in your best interest. These funds were managed with the understanding that they were for the benefit of the family unit as a whole. The family unit as a whole? I stood up, the folder clutched in my hand. The pain in my head was a dull throb now, overshadowed by the sharp clarity of my purpose. My grandmother's will was not for the family unit as a whole. It was for me. She saw my vulnerability, and she tried to protect me. My parents and you, apparently, failed spectacularly in honoring her wishes. I walked towards the door. I will be in touch. I expect a full accounting of every dollar withdrawn, with detailed explanations of how each transaction complied with the trust, and I expect a proposal for immediate restitution. If that proposal is not satisfactory, I will be pursuing all legal avenues to recover what is rightfully mine. I left his office, the door clicking shut behind me, leaving Abernathy in stunned silence. The power dynamic had shifted. He knew it.
My parents, when they inevitably heard from him, would know it too. The knowledge of his negligence, of his complicity, was a weapon. He was now as exposed as they were. The next few days were a blur of frantic activity. I contacted an attorney, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Sarah Chen, who specialized in estate litigation. She listened intently as I laid out the case, her eyes narrowing with professional interest. She confirmed my suspicions. Abernathy had indeed violated his fiduciary duty, and my mother's actions, without the proper trustee's authorization, constituted a breach of the trust. The missing funds, she explained, could be considered a breach of trust, and Abernathy could be held liable for negligence, potentially even forced to repay funds from his own accounts, alongside my parents. Sarah advised me to gather any and all correspondence, any proof of my parents' discussions about the inheritance, any mention of their financial needs, anything that showed their awareness of the trust's purpose and their intent to utilize it for their own benefit. I started sifting through old emails, voicemails, and even digging through boxes of old family photos and documents. I found a series of emails from my mother sent years ago before Grandma passed, where she'd expressed concerns about Mark's increasing debt and how this inheritance of Sarah's could be a safety net for all of us when the time comes. The safety net was meant for me, not for Mark's financial missteps. The most damning piece of evidence came from an old voicemail on my mother's answering machine, a relic from before I'd even been diagnosed. It was my father's voice, gruff and low, speaking to my mother. "Don't let her get too comfortable with that money, Clara. It's not meant to last forever. We'll need to make sure it serves its purpose for the family, for the kids. She's fragile. She won't know the difference." The date stamp was clear. He knew. He had always known. He had tacitly approved of the plan to drain my inheritance, masking it under the guise of my illness. The humiliation of that realization, the sheer depth of their calculated betrayal, hit me like a physical blow. I felt a wave of sickness wash over me, but it was the sickness of pure, unadulterated rage. I confronted my mother first. I didn't call her. I drove to their house. The familiar scent of my mother's overly floral perfume filled the air as she greeted me, her smile just a little too wide, a little too forced. "Darling, what a surprise. You're looking a little pale, dear. Are you feeling all right? Did you eat breakfast?" She ushered me into the living room, where my father sat reading the newspaper, his face impassive. I sat down, my hands clenched in my lap. "Mom, Dad," I began, my voice shaking slightly, but with an underlying firmness. "I know about the money, all of it." My mother's smile faltered. "What are you talking about, dear? Your inheritance is perfectly safe. Mr. Abernathy manages it beautifully." "No, Mom, it's not safe," I said, looking directly at my father. His newspaper lowered a fraction. "I know about the withdrawals. I know about the landscape renovations, the trips, the tuition payments. And I know that you authorized them, Mom. And that you, Dad, as the trustee, either didn't know or didn't care to stop it." My father's eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw not just apathy, but a flicker of something akin to panic. He looked quickly at my mother, then back at me. "What are you implying, Sarah?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. "I'm not implying anything, Dad. I'm stating facts. I have the trust document. I have the withdrawal statements. And I have a voicemail from you, from years ago, discussing how to manage my inheritance for the family and make sure I don't get too comfortable. You were complicit. You both were.
my mother gasped, placing a hand over her chest. How dare you? After everything we've done for you. We've supported you, cared for you, while you've been so ill, and this is how you repay us? By accusing us of theft? Her voice rose, laced with self-righteous indignation. Theft isn't always about breaking locks, Mom, I said, my voice chillingly calm. Sometimes it's about quiet manipulation, about exploiting trust and illness. You saw my weakness, and you took advantage of it. You saw Grandma's legacy, and you treated it like your personal piggy bank. My father finally put down his newspaper. His face was grim. Sarah, this is a serious accusation. Abernathy assured us everything was in order. He handled the paperwork. We trusted his counsel. You trusted him to facilitate your own agendas, I countered, my voice gaining strength. He failed in his duty as a fiduciary, but you, Dad, as the primary trustee, failed in your duty to me. You had the ultimate responsibility, and you abdicated it. You let my mother drain my inheritance because it was easier than having a difficult conversation, or because you simply agreed with her plan. My mother stood up, her face flushed with anger. We will not stand here and be insulted. If you think you can come into our home and accuse us like this— I'm not accusing you, Mom, I interrupted, standing up as well. The tremor was gone. My legs felt solid beneath me, fueled by an adrenaline that was far more potent than any painkiller. I'm informing you. I have legal representation. We have the evidence, and we are going to reclaim every single dollar that was taken from my trust, along with damages. Mr. Abernathy is equally liable. So you have two choices. You can cooperate, and we can work towards a resolution, or we can proceed with litigation, and everything will be laid bare. Your reputation, your finances, everything. A suffocating silence descended upon the room. My mother stared at me, her mouth slightly ajar, her usual bluster completely deflated. My father's gaze was fixed on my face, his expression unreadable, a mixture of shock, anger, and perhaps a dawning realization of the precipice they stood upon. The carefully constructed facade of their benevolent care had crumbled, exposing the cold, calculated self-interest beneath. They had underestimated my resilience, my intellect, and my capacity for righteous anger. They had assumed my sickness made me weak. They were wrong. It had made me dangerous, and the fight had only just begun. The air crackled with an unspoken tension, a prelude to the storm that was about to break. I had laid down the gauntlet. Now I waited for their move, ready for whatever came next. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, a physical manifestation of the years of unspoken truths and hidden resentments. My mother's face was a mask of disbelief, her carefully curated composure shattering like delicate porcelain. My father, usually so stoic, looked like a man who had just been blindsided by a freight train.
He remained seated, his gaze locked on me, the newspaper forgotten on his lap. The air vibrated with the unspoken, a symphony of shock, denial, and dawning dread. I held their gaze, my own steady, unwavering. The pain in my head had receded, replaced by a fierce, exhilarating clarity. This was the moment, the culmination of months of quiet investigation, of pain endured, of fury simmering. So, my mother finally whispered, her voice a thin thread of sound, "You're going to sue us?" The words were laced with a profound sense of betrayal, as if I were the one who had committed the offense. "If necessary," I replied, my voice flat, devoid of the emotion that had once dictated my interactions with them. "But I'd prefer we resolve this amicably. My lawyer has sent Abernathy a preliminary notice. He's already in damage control. He's likely already offered you a deal, a way to protect himself by making you the scapegoat. He knows he's screwed, and he knows that if this goes to court, the details of his negligence and your complicity will become public record. He's not going to let that happen without a fight." My father shifted, a barely perceptible movement. "What exactly do you want, Sarah?" he asked, his voice raspy, stripped of its usual authority. "What I want is what is rightfully mine," I said, enunciating each word deliberately. "The full principle of my inheritance, untouched, as it was intended by my grandmother, and compensation for the emotional distress, the years of dependence you fostered, the years you've used my illness as leverage. Abernathy's liability is significant. He facilitated everything. He's liable for the losses incurred due to his negligence, and you, Dad,
as the trustee who failed to act, are also liable. Mom, your unauthorized withdrawals are a clear breach of trust. This isn't about charity anymore. This is about accountability. My mother let out a choked sob. You're being unreasonable. We've always looked out for you. We've provided for you. That money was for your security, and we ensured that security. It took different forms. Trips, renovations, Mark's children's education, these are all investments in the family's well-being, which ultimately benefits you. No, Mom, I said, the coldness in my voice sharpening. That money was for my security, my future. Grandma saw that you and Mark would always be taken care of, in your own way. She saw my vulnerability, and she created a safety net for me. A safety net that you systematically dismantled to fund your own lifestyle and your son's irresponsible habits. The family was never supposed to be the primary beneficiary. I was. I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. And the fact that you can sit there and twist it like this, even now, it's astounding. It shows how little you truly understand the gravity of what you've done. My father finally stood up, his movements stiff. He walked over to the window, his back to us, staring out at the manicured lawn that had, it turned out, been funded in part by my inheritance. Abernathy said he was just following instructions, he murmured, his voice barely audible. He said your mother was handling the disbursements, that it was all for your benefit. He made it sound normal. Normal? I scoffed. Drain an entire trust fund, not for the beneficiary's direct needs, but for lavish renovations and private school tuition, and that's normal? He's a lawyer, Dad.
He knows the law. He knows fiduciary duty. He knows what constitutes a breach of trust. He advised you. And you, as the trustee, signed off on it, or allowed it to happen by inaction. That voicemail of yours, Dad, that's what's going to be hard to explain away. She's fragile. She won't know the difference. That's not the language of a trustee acting in the best interest of a beneficiary. That's the language of someone planning to exploit a vulnerable person. My mother's face contorted, tears streaming down her cheeks now. You recorded us? You secretly recorded your own father? Her voice was a mixture of outrage and horror. It was a voicemail on your answering machine, Mom, I said, my gaze fixed on my father. A relic from a time before my diagnosis, before you all decided to weaponize my illness. A time when perhaps you weren't so careful. It was proof, Dad. Proof that you were aware, that this wasn't just my mother's independent decision. It was a calculated plan, agreed upon, to control and deplete my inheritance. The weight of that proof seemed to crush my father. He turned from the window, his face etched with a weariness that went bone deep. Clara always said she wanted her grandchildren to be taken care of. She worried about Mark. She worried about his nature. She wanted to ensure that no matter what, the family would be secure. And she ensured my security, Dad, I almost shouted, the control I had been maintaining for so long beginning to fray. She left money for me, to live on, to be independent, to not be beholden to anyone, not to fund Mark's endless financial black holes, not to redecorate your patio, not to send your grandchildren to fancy schools. That was my money, Grandma's money, for me. And you, the man she trusted to be my guardian, let it be stolen. My mother lunged forward, her hands outstretched, as if to grab my arm, but I flinched away. Don't you dare talk about Grandma like that. We loved her. We honored her wishes. No, you honored your own greed, I stated, my voice now a low, steady hum. And Abernathy enabled it. He facilitated it. And now he's going to pay for it. And so are you. I held up the folder I had brought with me. Sarah Chen has drafted a formal demand letter. It outlines the breaches, the negligence, the unauthorized withdrawals, and the estimated total amount owed. It includes the evidence from the statements and the voicemail. Abernathy has been given 72 hours to respond with a proposal for full restitution, including punitive damages. If he fails to do so, or if his proposal is unsatisfactory, we will file a lawsuit against him, and by extension, against both of you, for your roles in this breach of trust. My mother let out a sound that was halfway between a sob and a shriek. A lawsuit? Against your own parents? You would do that? If you leaves me no other choice, I said, my voice hardening.
You have consistently prioritized your own comfort and your son's needs over my well-being and my grandmother's explicit wishes. You have used my illness as a tool to control me and to justify your financial recklessness. You have betrayed my trust on every level. I have nothing left to lose by fighting for what is mine. What do you have to lose by refusing to cooperate? My father walked over to the sofa and sat down heavily, running a hand over his tired eyes. This is a mess, Sarah. A terrible mess. It is, I agreed.
And you're both responsible for creating it. Abernathy is going to try and buy his way out of this, likely by pointing the finger squarely at you. He'll say he was just following your directives. He'll try to protect his license and his reputation. But the trust document is clear. The primary trustee, that's you, Dad, had the ultimate responsibility. And the beneficiary's consent was required for significant withdrawals, not just the primary trustee's wife's unilateral signature. My mother sank back onto her chair, her face pale and drawn. What would this restitution look like? She stammered, her bravado finally gone. It would look like the full principal of my inheritance, plus interest, plus compensation for the emotional and financial damages you've inflicted, I said, my voice unwavering. It would mean liquidating assets, selling properties, whatever it takes. And Abernathy, his firm, they are on the hook for considerable sums due to his negligence. He will fight tooth and nail, but his position is weak. He cannot deny he had the trust document and the statements. He cannot deny he processed withdrawals without proper authorization. I stood up, the folder still clutched in my hand. The weight of it was no longer a burden, but a symbol of my newfound strength. I'm not going to beg or plead anymore. I'm not asking for your forgiveness or your understanding. I'm demanding what is mine. You have 2 days to inform me, through my lawyer, if you are willing to discuss a settlement or if you want to face me in court. The ball is in your court, and I'm warning you, I'm not backing down. Not ever again. I walked to the front door, my steps measured, deliberate. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I could feel their stunned silence behind me, the suffocating weight of their shock. As I stepped out into the crisp autumn air, the scent of decaying leaves filling my lungs, I felt a sense of profound release. The cage was broken. The locks were sprung. The years of humiliation, of silent suffering, of being treated as less than, had culminated in this moment. The drive back to my small apartment felt different. The road ahead seemed clearer, the path forward unburdened by the crushing weight of my family's control. I parked the car, walked up the familiar steps, and entered my quiet space. The silence here was not oppressive, but peaceful. I made myself a cup of tea, the warmth seeping into my chilled hands. I sat by the window, watching the golden light of late afternoon paint the sky. I thought about Grandma, her wisdom, her foresight. She knew they would try, and she made sure I had a way out. I thought about the years of pain, the debilitating fatigue, the moments of despair. They had tried to break me, to control me, to diminish me, but they had underestimated me. They had underestimated the quiet strength that can bloom in the darkest of places. The fight wasn't over, not entirely. There would be negotiations, legal wrangling, perhaps even a trial. But the core of it, the emotional battle, was won. I had reclaimed my voice. I had reclaimed my power. I had reclaimed my inheritance. And I had reclaimed myself. The story of Sarah Hayes, the frail, dependent daughter, was over. The story of Sarah Hayes, the woman who fought for her future and won, was just beginning. As the last rays of sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the room, I took a deep, steadying breath.
It was the breath of a survivor, the breath of a victor, the breath of a woman finally free.